Imagine waking up every day believing you're about to witness the end of the world. Now imagine someone claims to have the answers, the powers, the enlightenment, and all they demand is your total obedience. This is how one of the darkest stories in modern human psychology began. The Jonestown cult, led by Jim Jones, a man who started as a pastor and ended as a prophet of death, a manipulator with an almost supernatural charisma, whose ability to control hundreds of minds made him the archetype of a psychopath disguised as a savior. James Warren Jones was born in 1931 in the state of Indiana, USA. From a very young age, there were signs that something was different about him. Fascinated by death, religious cults, and domination, Jim grew up collecting small animals only to conduct bizarre experiments on them. This behavior is one of the earliest signs of antisocial personality disorder, a hallmark of the classic psychopath. But what made Jim so dangerous wasn't his violence. It was his extremely developed emotional intelligence. He knew how to read people. He knew what they wanted to hear. He knew how to become what others desired. He began his career as a preacher, creating a community called the People's Temple, with promises of racial equality, social justice, and Christian love. In a country still torn by racial segregation, Jones preached integration. But what appeared to be a progressive, inclusive movement hit a psychopathic machine operating with precision. Jim was building a cult, not just a church, but an army of minds devoted to him. He didn't want followers. He wanted servants. He wanted submission. As the People's Temple grew, Jim increased his control. It became common to see members giving up all their material possessions, handing over properties, salaries, even custody of their children. Psychologically, he used known conditioning techniques: intermittent reinforcement, isolation from the outside world, constant surveillance, public punishments, and a cult of personality based on supposed miracles he staged himself. Desperate people, with unresolved traumas, found in him a father, a savior, a god. And when you surrender your critical thinking to another human being, all that remains is the echo of your own destruction. In 1974, fearing the FBI and journalistic investigations, Jim relocated his community to a remote area in the jungle of Guyana, South America. Jonestown was born, a utopia isolated from the world that would become one of the largest cemeteries of collective psychology. What happened there defies reason, but the mind behind it all followed a clear and terrifying pattern. Jonestown wasn't just a community, it was an open-air prison. The Guyanese jungle, hot, muggy, and suffocating, became the setting for one of the greatest tragedies ever orchestrated by a single man. Jim Jones, now gripped by delusions of grandeur and drug addiction, turned Jonestown into a laboratory of mind control. Members woke to his voice, slept to his voice, worked exhausting hours with minimal food, lived in a constant state of alertness like obedient soldiers in a war that never existed. The techniques Jones used weren't simple religious doctrines. He exploited deep principles of behavioral psychology. The geographic isolation eliminated any chance for outside perspective. Sleep and food deprivation, combined with public humiliation and constant indoctrination, slowly broke down each follower's identity. Psychologists define this process as ego dissolution, the systematic deconstruction of individual personality until only a moldable mass remains. Jones staged death rehearsals, simulating mass suicides with poison, rehearsals that would later prove to be preparation for the final massacre. These macabre rituals weren't just obedience tests. They reinforced the idea that life outside Jonestown had no value. By promoting a narrative of siege, the world hates us, the government wants to destroy us, he created an external enemy necessary to keep the group united. Cult psychology is clear: a charismatic leader, plus isolation, plus fear, plus promises of salvation, total submission. It's important to understand that Jones wasn't just a lunatic. He understood the value of trauma. Many of his followers came from difficult lives: family abuse, structural racism, extreme poverty. Jim offered meaning, belonging, redemption, but at a cost: the surrender of autonomy. And when an entire community gives up its will to a single man, that man holds a power no constitution can contain. Even while sick, with advanced paranoia and constant mental breakdowns, Jones maintained absolute control over more than 900 people. Loudspeaker broadcasts were non-stop. Food was rationed while he feasted in secret. Surveillance was constant. and punishment for questioning ranged from beatings to imprisonment in dugout earth holes. Faith was no longer a choice. It was a sentence. But in November 1978, the world saw, horrified, just how far the mind of a psychopath with absolute power could go. November 18, 1978 entered history as the largest mass suicide of the modern era. But the truth, as always, is more perverse than the label suggests. This wasn't just suicide. It was murder, coercion, and manipulation at the highest degree. Jonestown would become a mass grave of lined-up bodies, a field of souls destroyed by a mind that had long crossed the boundaries of sanity. It began with a visit from Congressman Leo Ryan, responding to reports of abuse and kidnapping. Ryan, accompanied by journalists and concerned former members, arrived at the community intending to investigate. Initially, everything seemed calm, always a carefully built facade by Jones, but the tension was palpable. Amid forced smiles and rehearsed answers, some members discreetly approached the team, begging for help to escape. The empire of control was beginning to crumble. Realizing he would lose followers, and that the visit would draw international attention, Jim Jones decided it was time to end the show. In true grandiose psychopath fashion, he orchestrated an apocalyptic finale. He ordered the defectors murdered at the airstrip. Ryan was shot over 20 times. Journalists fell there too, under a hail of bullets from armed followers. Meanwhile, back at Jonestown, Jones gathered everyone in the main pavilion. With a calm, almost paternal voice, he announced that time had run out. They're coming to get us, to torture us. We can't let that happen. Let's die with dignity. Let's choose our own end. He offered the poison as if it were redemption. The liquid, a mixture of juice and cyanide, was first given to the children. Babies were fed poison through syringes. Parents watched their children die before taking their dose. Many tried to resist, but were forced by armed guards. Those who cried were silenced. Those who hesitated, pushed. Those who fled, hunted. The audio from that night still exists. 44 minutes of despair, pleading, nervous applause, and the hypnotic voice of Jim Jones. Like a maestro of destruction, he speaks of peace, sacrifice, eternal love, while life ebbs away around him. In the end, he dies too. A gunshot to the head seals the end of his reign of terror. In total, 918 people died that day, including 304 children. But the most terrifying part wasn't the death itself. It was that so many believed they were doing the right thing. This is where Jim Jones's monstrous mind reached its peak. He didn't just kill, he convinced. He manipulated. He molded hearts and minds until the very idea of life had no meaning without him. The question that haunts anyone who studies the Jonestown case is, how does an ordinary man become such an effective monster? To answer this, we must enter the psychological machinery of Jim Jones, not with the eyes of justice but with the scalpel of science. Psychopaths, according to forensic psychology, exhibit a pattern of common traits: lack of empathy, extreme manipulation, superficial charm, pathological egocentrism, and an insatiable need for control. Jones displayed all these traits with terrifying perfection. His ability to persuade, to move, to hypnotize crowds wasn't just charisma. It was a cold emotional control mechanism. Jim used love as a weapon. He presented himself as a father, pastor, healer. He touched the sick, staged miracle cures, cried in emotional sermons. But behind the scenes, everything was calculated. He kept detailed records of his members, knew their traumas, fears, desires, and used all of it as psychological ammunition. When someone drifted away, he publicly exposed and humiliated them. When someone showed full devotion, they were rewarded with crumbs of attention, just enough to maintain dependence. Jones's psychopathy was not impulsive. It was methodical. His obsession with control led him to manipulate marriages, interfere in relationships, separate parents from children, all in the name of loyalty. He understood something most people don't. When a human is deprived of external emotional bonds, they cling desperately to the only remaining tie, even if it's a chain. Moreover, Jones was a clinically grandiose narcissist. His messianic delusions, his contempt for any external authority, his desire to be loved and feared simultaneously, all of this forms the picture of malignant narcissism. He didn't just want to lead, he wanted to be God. And when that desire could no longer be sustained in reality, he preferred to destroy everything, including himself. Curiously, Many high-functioning psychopaths avoid direct violence, but Jim Jones went further. He chose apocalypse as a form of eternity. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be tragic. He wanted to be the center of everything, even in death. The Jonestown tragedy didn't end with the bodies laid out in rows in the Guyanese jungle. The true impact lingers in the invisible scars left on the minds of survivors, family members, and the collective memory of humanity. Because what Jim Jones created was more than a massacre, he built a sickening mirror of our need for belonging, of the existential void that makes us vulnerable to manipulation. Survivors of cults like the People's Temple often suffer from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares, survivor's guilt, chronic anxiety and paranoia are just a few of the symptoms haunting those who escaped the collapse. Many never managed to reintegrate into normal life. They felt as if they had betrayed their dead friends, or that they didn't deserve to be alive. The emotional pain, compounded by social stigma, pushed them further to the margins, making it difficult even to talk about what they had lived through. Furthermore, Jonestown exposed a deep wound in American society: institutional neglect toward communities that grow in the cracks of the system. Many of Jones's followers were black, poor, and forgotten by the government. The promise of a racially equal paradise is what made them surrender, and it was that very promise that destroyed them. It is a brutal lesson on how social desperation can be fertile ground for the rise of tyrannical leaders. At the time, the media sensationalized the event. Headlines like "The Poison of Fanaticism" or "Religious Massacre" dominated newspapers, but little attention was paid to the psychological complexity of the phenomenon. Few people asked, how did so many people reach this point? The answer isn't simple, but part of it lies in our biological predisposition to conformity. The famous Milgram experiment from the 1960s had already shown that ordinary people are capable of inflicting pain on others if an authority figure tells them to. In Jonestown, the authority was sacred. Jim Jones had become, in his followers' eyes, the sole source of truth. And when truth is monopolized, reality distorts. Another piece of this puzzle is the concept of cognitive dissonance. The more time, resources, and faith a person invests in a cause, the harder it becomes to admit they were wrong. That's why, even in the face of obvious abuse, many People's Temple members continued defending Jones until the end. Admitting the mistake would mean destroying their own identity. Jonestown also left a lasting impact on how the world deals with cults and religious leaders. Laws were reviewed. Intelligence agencies began monitoring isolated communities more closely. But perhaps the most important legacy is the silent warning. The human mind is incredibly powerful and dangerously malleable. The story of Jonestown continues to echo like a macabre whisper in our collective conscience, not because it was unique, but because it repeats, in different forms, in different times. Jim Jones's cult is the reflection of a structural failure, the human fragility in the face of charisma, of the promise of salvation, and of the fear of abandonment. What happened in 1978 can and certainly will happen again if we fail to recognize the signs. Today, charismatic leaders continue to rise in every sphere: politics, religion, social media. They use the same discourse of exclusivity, the same promises of absolute truth, the same mechanisms of isolation and control. What once required physical separation is now done through algorithms. The voices that once echoed through megaphones now scream in timelines. But the logic is identical. Trust only me. Everyone else is against you. The case of Jonestown must be studied not only as a historical tragedy, but as a psychological phenomenon. It is a warning to therapists, educators, leaders, and citizens. Any structure where criticism is punished, where doubt is condemned, and where obedience is demanded as a virtue is on the brink of collapse. And when it collapses, it will drag lives with it. The moral of the story is clear and disturbing. The desperate search for belonging can make us easy prey for emotional predators. When we transfer our power of decision to another person, whether out of love, fear, or blind faith, we give up the only thing that's truly ours, our consciousness. And consciousness is what separates a human being from a puppet. Jim Jones died from a bullet, but his shadow still lives. It lives in seductive speeches, in messianic promises, in the ease with which we forget past lessons. But there is hope. The same mind that is vulnerable to manipulation is also capable of awakening, of questioning, of resisting. If this video touched you, it's because there's something powerful in you, the impulse to understand. And understanding is the first step to breaking the cycle. Jonestown taught us that blind faith kills, but lucidity saves. That doubt is not weakness, it is protection. And that freedom, no matter how frightening it may seem, will always be more dignified than any golden cage. The Jonestown cult was more than a tragedy. It was a window into the depths of human behavior, a dark reminder of how pain, fear, and loneliness can lead us to follow leaders who claim to have all the answers. But there are no perfect saviors. There are no absolute truths. There is, however, the power to choose, to question, to rebuild. If you're hearing this, know that your mind is the most precious thing you possess. Protect it. Nourish it with critical thinking, with empathy, with truth, and never, ever hand the key to your consciousness to anyone. The world is full of Jim Joneses disguised as pastors, gurus, and influencers. Recognize them, reject them, and help others do the same. Thank you for watching this video. We kindly ask you to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, turn on the notification bell to be alerted about our upcoming posts. See you in the next video.